first thing Caleb Rourke noticed was the sound, or rather, the lack of it. For 10 years, mornings at the Rourke Ranch began the same way. The low hum of the kettle, the soft clink of cups, and Maria's gentle footsteps moving through the kitchen before dawn. That morning the house felt hollow. When Maria finally appeared in the doorway, the kettle screamed on the stove, forgotten. And she leaned heavily on the frame, her face pale, her eyes lowered. Then Caleb saw her leg. She was limping badly, trying to hide it with a careful shuffle that fooled no one who had lived with silence long enough to hear the truth. Caleb was not a man of many words. The town called him Quiet Rourke, a nickname he never argued with. He believed words were promises, and promises should be kept or not spoken at all. He set down his mug, rose from the table, and watched Maria move one painful step at a time. There were bruises blooming like storm clouds along her calf and ankle, old ones fading into new. She flinched when she realized he'd seen them. "I'm fine," she said quickly. Too quickly, the lie rehearsed. Caleb nodded once, turned off the kettle and poured the water himself. He didn't ask questions. He didn't tell her what to do. He did something else instead. He pulled out a chair and waited until she sat, then placed a folded blanket over the back so she could rest her leg. His hands were steady, his eyes calm, but something hard had settled behind them. Maria had come to the ranch 3 years earlier, escaping a life that had worn her thin. She cleaned, cooked, kept the place alive. In return, Caleb paid fair wages, never pried, never raised his voice. The ranch had become her refuge, or so she had thought. That afternoon, Caleb watched from the porch as Maria struggled across the yard, her limp more pronounced now that she thought she was alone. The sun cast long shadows over the fields, and Caleb felt the old weight settle in his chest, the one he'd carried since his wife's accident years before. The one that told him when something precious was being threatened. He went inside and opened a drawer he hadn't touched in a long time. Inside were documents, neatly organized. He added a new folder, labeled only with a date. The next day, Maria didn't show up at all. Caleb waited until noon, then 1 o'clock. At 2, he saddled his truck and drove into town, past the feed store and the diner, to the small house on the edge of the highway where Maria lived with her boyfriend, Evan. Caleb had seen Evan only twice. He'd noticed the way Evan talked over Maria, the way his hand lingered on her arm too tightly. At the time, Caleb had said nothing. Silence had been easier. The door was ajar when Caleb arrived. Inside, the house smelled of stale beer and fear. A lamp lay shattered on the floor. Maria sat on the couch, her leg wrapped in a makeshift bandage, her eyes red and distant. Evan stood in the kitchen, shouting into his phone, his voice sharp and careless. Caleb didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten, simply stepped between Evan and Maria and said, "She's coming with me." Evan laughed. Then he saw Caleb's eyes. The sheriff's office received the first call an hour later from the emergency clinic. Maria's injuries were worse than she'd let on. A fractured ankle, bruised ribs, signs of repeated abuse. The nurse asked who brought. Her and Maria pointed down the hall. "My employer," she said softly. "My friend." The second call came from Caleb himself. He walked into the sheriff's office with a stack of papers under his arm and a calm that made the room go still. Sheriff Donnelly had known Caleb for years. He knew that when Quiet Rourke spoke, it mattered. Caleb laid the papers on the desk. Photos, dates, notes. He had noticed things over time, the bruises, the missed days, the changes in Maria's voice. He hadn't acted on impulse. He documented everything. He had installed security cameras around his property for livestock protection, and they had caught Evan more than once waiting by the gate, shouting threats, grabbing Maria when he thought no one was looking. Caleb had saved it all. "I should have." "Come sooner," Caleb said, his voice low. "But I'm here now." The room buzzed with movement. Deputies leaned in. The sheriff's jaw tightened. This wasn't a domestic dispute brushed aside with warnings. This was evidence. This was a pattern. Evan was arrested that evening. When they brought him in, loud and angry, the deputies kept glancing at the file labeled with dates, at the quiet rancher sitting on the bench outside, hat in his hands. The story spread fast. By morning, everyone in town knew. Maria stayed at the ranch during her recovery. Caleb converted the spare room into a sunlit space with a view of the fields. He hired a nurse to help with her leg and insisted without insisting that Maria take all the time she needed. Some days they spoke. Little other days, Maria talked for hours, her words tumbling out as if she'd been holding them back for years. Caleb listened. That was his gift. The trial came 3 months later. Evan's lawyer tried to paint Maria as dramatic, unreliable. Then the videos played. The photos appeared. The dates aligned. The courtroom fell silent. When Caleb took the stand, he answered each question plainly. He didn't embellish. He didn't seek praise. He told the truth. The verdict was swift. Afterward, the sheriff shook Caleb's hand. "You did more than most would," he said. "You changed how we'll handle these cases." Caleb shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just paid attention," he replied. Maria didn't return to the ranch as a maid. She stayed. As family. With time, her limp faded. Her laughter returned. She enrolled in night classes, dreaming of becoming a nurse. On her first day of school, Caleb waited in the truck until she went inside, then tipped his hat and drove home, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The ranch was quiet again, but it was a good quiet natha, kind that holds healing, not secrets. Caleb sat on the porch one evening, watching the sun sink behind the hills, and thought about how close he'd come to doing nothing. How easy it would have been to look away. Silence, he realized, could protect or destroy. That day he had chosen to let it end. Somewhere in the sheriff's office, a new protocol was being written, one that began with a simple line, "Pay attention. Someone's life may depend on it."